On the map, Sweden looks safe, no border with Russia, protected by water, flanked by NATO members. But in a real war, none of that matters, because Sweden's safety depends on one thing: Finland fighting first, a country with a 1,340-kilometer border with Russia. For decades, Sweden and Finland weren't even allies, but behind the scenes, they built a defense system so tightly connected that if one fails, the other is exposed. So here's the question: is Sweden actually safe, or is Finland the only reason it looks that way? Sweden looks like a fortress protected by the Baltic Sea. But in this era of electronic and hypersonic warfare, that moat has been reclassified by military planners as a high-speed highway. Russia has a Baltic fleet. It has Kaliningrad, a militarized exclave sitting directly on the Baltic coast. And it has access through the Gulf of Finland. The water doesn't protect Sweden, it just slows things down. And there's another problem. In the south, between Poland and Lithuania, there's a strip of land just 65 kilometers wide. It's called the Suwalki Gap. If Russia closes it, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are cut off, surrounded. So, Sweden isn't sitting safely behind water. It's sitting at the edge of one of the most volatile strategic zones in Europe. And the only reason it doesn't feel that way is because Finland is standing in front of it, which means any invasion from the east starts in Finland. And that changes everything, because in military strategy, there's one concept that matters more than anything else: time. And Sweden gets that time, because Finland stands in front of it. Finland wasn't always this prepared. It became this way after nearly losing everything. In November 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland. Stalin expected it to be over in weeks. Finland was smaller, outgunned, outnumbered, and completely alone. But something unexpected happened. Finland didn't collapse. It resisted, fought in forests, used terrain, used winter, and held. For every Finnish soldier killed, the Soviets lost 5 or 6. Finland was fighting one of the largest militaries on Earth and inflicting losses at that ratio. The Soviet army looked powerful on paper, but inside, it was broken. Leadership purged, commanders replaced. Finland exploited every weakness, but still barely survived. When the war ended in March 1940, Finland had not been conquered, but it paid a brutal price. It lost 11% of its territory, including Karelia, its industrial heartland, Viborg, its second-largest city, and access to Lake Ladoga, gone permanently. That war left a mark that never healed. Finland learned one lesson above all others: that no one is coming to save you. So build a system that never needs saving. Today, Finland has one of the most prepared militaries in Europe. Not the biggest or the most expensive, but one of the hardest to break. Finland uses universal male conscription, and in war, it can mobilize around 280,000 troops from a reserve of nearly 900,000. To understand how extraordinary that is, Finland's total population is 5.5 million. For comparison, the United Kingdom's total military reserve sits around 37,000. But conscription is only part of it. High-performing recruits don't just train once. They're cycled back for officer training, specialist roles, and command exercises. Finland doesn't just create soldiers, it creates a professional force that wears civilian clothes. And then there's the hardware. Finland has more artillery pieces than France, Germany, and the United Kingdom combined. But the infrastructure behind it is even more astonishing. Finland has built over 50,000 kilometers of bunkers, tunnels, and pre-positioned supply caches designed to slow, absorb, and bleed any invading force. This isn't a military, it's a country designed to become a military. But Finland doesn't stop at the military. It prepares its entire society. Food stockpiles, fuel reserves, underground shelters for most of the population. Private companies, supermarkets, trucking are legally part of the military's logistics web. This is called total defense. Finland is not designed to win quickly. It's designed to not lose at all. And that's exactly what Sweden needs. So at this point, you might think, if Finland is this strong, why does Sweden even matter? Now here's where the story flips. While Finland spent decades building that system, Sweden was doing the opposite. During the Cold War, Sweden maintained one of Europe's most capable, independent militaries. Sweden was ready to fight, but after the Cold War ended, It assumed the threat was gone. Between 1990 and 2010, Sweden systematically dismantled what it had built. It abolished conscription in 2010, reduced its tank fleet by over 80%, closed dozens of bases, and collapsed defense spending to levels that left its military a fraction of its former capability. Sweden gambled on peace. Finland never stopped preparing. That contrast is the core of this story. But buried inside Sweden's Cold War planning was a critical assumption that never went away. Swedish defense doctrine was built around the expectation that Finland would be the first battlefield in any large-scale Eastern conflict. Sweden's mobilization timelines, its Air Force positioning, its industrial planning, all of it assumed Finland would absorb the opening phase of any war, buying Sweden time to respond. If Finland holds, Sweden can mobilize and respond. If Finland falls, Russia doesn't just threaten Sweden, they threaten the rail lines that supply 80% of Europe's iron ore. The Malmbanan, or the Iron Ore Line, is a single track that carries nearly 80% of the European Union's iron ore from mines in northern Sweden to the coast. Even Sweden's fighter jet tells the story. The Saab Gripen was designed to operate from roads, not just air bases, because Swedish planners knew their bases would be targeted early. So they built a jet that could take off from a highway. That detail isn't just interesting. It shows how deeply the war scenario assuming Finland to take the first blow was embedded in Swedish thinking. For years, none of this was official. No treaty, no public announcement, no alliance, just two countries quietly building something neither would name out loud. It started in 2009, a framework called NORDEFCO. On paper, shared logistics, aligned planning cycles, cooperation between neighbors. But behind it, something more significant was taking shape. Command structures fusing. Two separate territories are being treated as one battle space, not in public, not in any document anyone could read. And in 2018, a formal Memorandum of Understanding was signed. Then in 2019, a military strategic concept. This non-public agreement allowed for full joint planning and operations, effectively creating a ghost alliance. By 2022, when both countries submitted their NATO applications, they weren't two neutral nations asking to join something new. They were a synchronized machine, asking for a roof. And then 2026 made it impossible to deny. Sweden now stations its own combat troops permanently on Finnish soil, part of a NATO battle group called Forward Land Forces, Finland. The Nordic Air Forces, 250 jets, no longer operate as separate fleets. They move as one. A strike on Helsinki is now a strike on Sweden, not by obligation, not by treaty clause, by design, built over decades, in silence. This isn't just strategy, it's geography. A look at the map. At the center of the Baltic Sea is a small Swedish island called Gotland. It looks unremarkable, but strategically, it's priceless. Whoever controls Gotland can place missiles, radar, and aircraft that cover the entire Baltic Sea, including the supply routes NATO would need to reinforce the Baltic. Sweden knew this, and then, quietly, forgot it. In 2005, Sweden withdrew its military garrison from Gotland entirely, left it undefended. In 2013, Russia ran a military exercise in the Baltic region. Part of that exercise simulated a nuclear strike with Sweden as target, and Gotland had no garrison, no air defense, no ground forces, nothing. Sweden's most strategically important piece of territory was completely exposed. That exercise was a message, and Sweden heard it. In 2016, it re-garrisoned Gotland, quietly acknowledging what had almost been lost. There's one more piece of this puzzle. Off the coast of Finland are the Åland Islands. It's an autonomous Finnish territory with over 6,000 islands, and completely, legally, permanently disarmed. Under agreements dating back to 1856 and reaffirmed by the League of Nations in 1921, Finland cannot place a single weapon there. In peacetime, that feels like a diplomatic quirk. In wartime, it's an open corridor into the heart of the system. The Gulf of Bothnia runs between Sweden and Finland. Åland sits at its southern entrance. Whoever controls those islands controls what moves through that water. And right now, no one controls them, because no one is allowed to. The demilitarization treaty has been debated. Pressure has grown, but the legal architecture hasn't moved. So, The system that took decades to build has a gap built into it by a 19th century peace agreement and looks like this. Finland, land shield on the Eastern Front. Sweden, industrial power, air force, and strategic depth. Gotland, control of the Baltic Sea. Åland, the gap in the armor, layer by layer, a complete structure, with one acknowledged vulnerability. For decades, this system remained unofficial, quiet, unspoken. Then Russia invaded Ukraine, and everything accelerated. Finland applied for NATO. Finally, in March 2024, Sweden joined, and just like that, the hidden system became official. NATO now has a continuous frontier from the Arctic to the Baltic, covered by Article 5. Nordic air forces integrating, command structures aligning, joint operations increasing. And so next time you look at the map and Sweden seems safe, ask yourself, is Sweden protected by geography or by a country that lost 11% of its territory, watched its cities handed over in a peace deal, and decided never again? Sweden looks safe. Finland is the reason why.